My name is Sarah Henkel, and I am a pastor in the Presbyterian Church. I live here in Stony Point, New York, and am moving shortly over to Middletown, New York, to be part of a place called Freedom Farm Community. And my spouse is a farmer, and I do some things that look like farming, but I'm more of a gardener. We have 2 children, and I just started this position as mission coordinator for the Synod of the Northeast. And so that's my big disclaimer, is that I just started. I came on, oh gosh, this is always embarrassing because like I literally have no idea what month anything is anymore. I started in February, I believe. And so I've been with the Synod for just one mission working group meeting. The mission working group is who reads over grant applications for the Synod and makes decisions about the innovation grant, the Emerging Gospel Communities Grant, campus ministry grants, and a new grant fund that we hope will be available for applications this summer, which is called the Youth Leadership Grant. So I'm going to share a little bit about those grants. I'll focus mostly on the innovation grants. Both the innovation grants and the Emerging Gospel Communities grants come from the same fund, and they're sort of using the same kind of vision in what they're looking for from applicants, with slightly different focus on who the applicants are. And I'll say a little bit about that. But basically the innovation grants are for transforming communities by the gospel. And the idea here is that the gospel is by its very nature innovative, transforming, changing, moving us forward. And so this fund is looking for new and innovative and creative and entrepreneurial projects that can be done by congregations within the Synod, or by groups of Presbyterian individuals within the Synod, or groups that may not be Presbyterian in name, but that involve the work of many Presbyterian volunteers in their efforts. And they're looking for projects that emphasize the Synod values, values of strengthening communities, values of diversity and inclusion, always expanding the welcome of the church, and of missional commitment. And I think now with the PCUSA's focus and the PMA's focus on Matthew 25 congregations, there's a real focus on that emphasis as well. So that's a basic outline of what the grant innovation and emerging gospel community grants are looking for. I'm wondering, have any of you been on the website and looked these over ever? There has, Victor, okay. Well, there's a bunch of information on the website. We are also in the process of reviewing and editing some of that, but it gives you a good idea of the kinds of things and the vision behind those grant funds. But Larry's suggestion, I think this is a good one, was just that I tell the story of a few grants that were applied for and were approved by the Mission Working Group, and kind of how they're going. And I really could talk about them all day, because it's really fun. It's fun to see what, what communities are coming up with. And I didn't focus on grants that came through in this round because they just got approved, and so there's not a whole lot to say about them yet. But I will say that it was really inspiring just to see how different congregations, different faith communities are responding to COVID, and just, kind of the wrench that threw in a lot of plans for how we worship, for how people survive, how they find food, how they find work. So it's just really beautiful to see the church being responsive to the needs of the community and people within their congregations and beyond. But before all that, I'll tell you about one congregation, First Presbyterian Church in Chester, New York, which is in the Presbyterian I'm a part of in Hudson River. Their grant was called Celebrate Creation, and basically there was, I think they were related to each other, two men in the congregation. One was a poet and one was, I think, a visual artist. This is where the disclaimer that I'm new to this position comes in. So, dear First Presbyterian Church, if I get some of these facts wrong, please correct me. But they got together and said, you know, it's really hard for artists to find space to do our work, and could the church support us in using a part of the building? And long story short, it didn't end up being those two people who actually grew into this vision, but what the congregation realized is that they had underutilized space within their church building, and they really wanted to emphasize this theological point that God continues to create. God's a creating God, and God encourages our passions and our dreams. And they approached and actually got started a Village of Chester Arts Association. So they kind of like grew together at once. The church had this vision and the village like shared it. And so they came together, and they've now created an arts space within the congregation, and are developing ways of inviting people from the community into that space. They've done, it's like an expansive definition of art, any crafts. They've done cooking classes. They've done upcycling. Do people know that term? I kind of like it. But yeah, basically like, you know, taking stuff that already exists and rather than recycling it, breaking down and making it to something else, like just sort of adjusting it and making it into a new thing. You know, working on fixing things instead of throwing them out. So there's also a creation care aspect to it. And they have said that it's really moved the church beyond their walls, you know, in strengthened community engagement. So that's one example of a congregation really like the innovative point being expanding their community partnership, and also expanding people beyond the church's kind of vision of what like what matters theologically. That God cares about creativity. God cares about beauty of our common spaces as well. A second one, this one, the innovation in this grant really focused on worship in this congregation. It comes from Third Church in Rochester, New York. And their grant was to enable them to provide ASL sign language interpretation for all of their worship services. So not occasional ones, but to make it a consistent offering within their congregation. And the roots of this grant are based in them just looking around and seeing where they're situated. I did not know this, but Rochester is home to the second largest deaf community in the nation. And there has the most deaf and hard of hearing people per capita of any city in the United States. And so they also noticed that if they were able to offer ASL interpretation at their worship services, they would be the only progressive Protestant church in the area offering that service. And so they also like the impetus for this grant was part of kind of a larger effort that they were focusing on to become a more welcoming place for all peoples. And they had a team that was called the All Abilities Inclusion Task Force. So they were really doing an assessment of their worship, of their building, thinking about how people with different abilities were able to access their space and their common life. And they commented in their application that as they began that task force and as they spoke to people who were facing barriers in being a part of their common life, that they had a lot of, oh, I never thought of that responses. So people were really transformed within their congregational life, just opened their eyes to what other people were experiencing. So they now I just went on their website and watched some of their YouTubes because, like everyone, they had to move to virtual worship, but all of their worship videos include an ASL interpretation box at the bottom. And I was just thinking that, the reach of that ministry actually is probably even greater than just the Rochester area now that they are on YouTube and virtual. So it's a really beautiful ministry. And the innovation there, I think, and the Synod value that one really lifts up is diversity and inclusion, and really shifting the way they were doing things to be sure that they were open to all. So the third one is kind of another category of ways that people are, using the innovation grant, which is to establish an entirely new organization with roots in the congregational life. And one example of that comes from the Presbyterian Church of Lawrenceville, New Jersey. And they started something called the Cookwell program. Basically, they did congregational study and were greatly concerned about the rates of incarceration in the United States, especially of Black and Brown people. And they wanted to do something positive and upbuilding as a congregation. And based on the vision of some people in their congregation, they began what's a culinary job training program for citizens returning from incarceration, where they could basically, a lot of churches have, what are they called? Kitchens that are certified. I can't think of the word, but that. And they were able to use space within the church building and do these trainings. And they established for this project an independent 501c3 with a part-time director. And I was looking at updates on the program. I think they received this grant. It's either three or 4 years ago, and it's going really well. And they shared one update that one of the people who went through the training is now the permanent prep chef for the upscale restaurant right across the street from the church. But they shared that what it's really done is strengthen kind of this network of community partnerships with local businesses, with people returning from incarceration, with a congregation who feels really committed to this mission project. And because I was curious about how everything's adapting to COVID, they actually transitioned to an online program when they had to be shut down for COVID protocol, and is called, I didn't write it down. I think it's called instead of the Cookwell program, it's called the Workwell program. And they've expanded to other areas of employment. So not just culinary training, but giving a whole breadth of supportive employment training, life skills training, all the things that are stripped from people when they are placed in prison. Just providing those so that they can transition back to life with organization. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Did Lawrenceville Pres partner with Princeton Seminary's Pharmary program? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't remember seeing that on the list of partners, but that's a good question. I saw the Trenton area soup kitchen, which I think that Princeton's Pharmary was partnering with. So it makes me think that somewhere in the mix there, they likely were in communication, but I don't know for a fact.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So those are just kind of 3 snapshots of how some grants are used, innovating in terms of increasing community partnerships, in terms of shifting worship practices to welcome new new segments of the community, sometimes creating what becomes its own nonprofit. So there's kind of lots of different levels that people use these grants for. And I'll just very briefly highlight the other grants that do exist. Like I said, the emerging emergency gospel, that's maybe another grant that should be quick, administer the gospel. Emerging gospel communities grant it's drawn from the same fund as the innovation fund, but I believe that the commissioners kind of recognize that emerging gospel communities do have some slight differences in how they are shaped and formed, and most specifically, the difference is that they wanted to combine the application or allow applicants to combine their application with the new worshiping community applications of the denomination. So basically, they kind of partner with the NWC application. So many of the applicants will submit their NWC application for part of the emerging gospel communities application. Otherwise, I mean, the criteria are very similar to innovation. They're looking for new creative ways of worshiping that expand kind of community partnerships, that expand the welcome of the church, and they're looking for worshiping communities that are not necessarily a spin-off of an existing congregation. They're looking for standalone entities. And I can definitely, I know there's a couple new worshiping communities or emerging gospel communities here on the call. I'm glad to say more if there's more questions on those. The youth leadership grant, we're meeting in June to go over criteria for that one, but basically these are funds that were set aside to support the development of youth leaders in the Synod. I mean, that's basically all I can tell you right now because they haven't written the criteria, but you know, really focusing on building up the next generation and the vision of young adults within the Synod bounds. And I believe that the Synod will put a communication out as soon as that application is open. And it will be on the same grants website or pages on the Synod website. And finally, the campus ministries grant. If any of you are connected to campus ministries in your bounds, the Synod's offering $2,500 per year grants to campus ministries, and has a good number of campus ministries that it's been supportive of for years now. And those applications were really remarkable in terms of adaptations for COVID. Just the campus ministry program seemed even more essential than ever, as some students got stranded on campus, and others really struggled to make ends meet, to have enough food. It just really drove home for me how important those ministries are in caring for the life and the health of students, both spiritually and physically. That's it. And I'm glad to answer any questions, and also to look for answers to questions with you if I don't know them, as I am new to this position. Go ahead, Greg.
So are these grants all on a grant cycle, or are they open application?
They are sort of. Basically, the way they had been doing it, that innovation grants were received at the May Synod Commission meeting, and that emerging gospel were received in September. Campus ministries were in at the January meeting. But it's more common that that this grant cycle, I'll say, that both emerging gospel communities and innovation were welcome to apply at the May meeting. I'll say that the innovation fund, innovation grants were highly competitive, and all of the funds were used at the May meeting. So we can't receive any additional applications in September. But that emerging gospel communities, I think in part because some of them are still following the cycle of applying in September, there's funds remaining for that grant fund, and so we'll be receiving applications in September. When we meet in June, that's one of the conversations we'll have, is if that system's working, or if we need to go back to a more a stricter grant cycle for each of the grants.
So is there a deadline prior? Because you meet in September. So what is it, 30 days prior?
Yeah, it's up on the website. I want to say it's something like August 2nd for the September grant cycle.
Okay, can I ask another question while I'm still unmuted? Is it possible that a couple of these grants might actually qualify for the same program based on the reach and the development of the program itself? For instance, the youth, once the youth one is up, it might fit a specific one that's still already receiving the new gospel, the emergency. Now you got me saying it, the emergency gospel. Hurry up! Is it possible that they can qualify for multiple grants?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, we actually, for example, this granting cycle, we did have to we reassigned one applicant because they applied under innovation, and it really was more an emerging gospel communities grant. So we just shifted them over. I think it's unlikely that the mission working group commissioners would grant multiple funds to one project, or grant funds for multiple grants to one project. I'll say that just because they are fairly competitive, and they're hoping to to fund a diversity of initiatives.
So one more quick question. When you say competitive, how many, do you have an idea statistically how many grants applications you received versus how many were awarded?
Yeah, so I think, gosh, I don't have the numbers of grants. I know that the total number of funds requested was in the neighborhood of 240,000 for $90,000 in funds. And I think that might be the better way to look at it, because we did, the mission working group recommended to the commission, just so you know, I need to say this correctly in terms of polity. The mission working group does not make the decisions. The mission working group, and not we, I'm staff, I have no voice in this. Mission working group commissioners recommend to the commission, and then they vote. That's how it goes. I always have to watch myself. I did take polity, but I'm not very good at it. Anyway, the mission working group recommended a lot of partial funding grants this time around, in order to honor the requests and help a greater number of projects than they would have if they had given full funding. I don't think any got full funding. The maximum funding you can request is $20,000 for 2 years, so a total of $40,000. But no project was granted the full 20,000. I think in terms of numbers, I believe that there were 12 innovation grants applications, and they funded 9 of them. So it's actually a good number of them got funded, but not for what they asked for.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I put links to the Innovation Grant, Emerging Gospel Communities Grant, and Campus Support Strategy Grant in the chat box. So you can go right there.
That's great, and stay tuned too, because some of the criteria is under review, and we'll also be creating a more streamlined progress report form, which I think will be helpful in contexts just like this one, where we can better tell the story of how people are using these funds and inspire each other. I'll also say just one more thing about innovation. I think I'll say there was one like applicant this grant cycle where it to me it didn't feel that innovative objectively, but that for the congregation it was a really big like stretch. And they portrayed that like very clearly, that this was like that they were pushing into like a really uncomfortable zone for themselves, and that it was uncomfortable for the partner that they were working with too, and that both partners felt like this was pretty innovative. And it actually was one of the favorite applications among the commissioners, and it's a really powerful ministry. But I think it, like, I'm glad to, if you are interested in applying, I'm glad to talk through kind of some of the things that I've noticed that they're looking for, the pieces you want to watch out for. Don't like to, the grant criteria that you'll see on the website emphasizes that they don't like to fund staff salaries or building projects that are intended to attract people or ministries that don't already exist. So there's some like kind of cautionary things written in the criteria that are important to look at. And again, I'm here as a resource person to kind of bridge between applicants and give you the best chance possible to receive the funds.
Any other questions? I expect we're going to be partying with you in the not too distant futures.
That sounds great. Woohoo. Well, I'll watch for your applications, especially these new worshiping communities, and many blessings as you continue building and innovating together in Utica Presbytery.
Hey, thank you, Sarah.
Sure.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yep. Take care.
Bye now.
Bye.